would like, if I may, to take you on a strange journey.
Hello, everyone, and welcome to another edition of Real Estate Realities with the Rebel Broker. My name's Robert Whitelaw, and I am the Rebel Broker, licensed real estate broker in the state of California, member of the National Association of Realtors. But please, don't hold that against me. Welcome to it, folks. We've got a couple of interesting items to discuss. One is sort of an opinion that kind of feeds into what we've been talking about recently in terms of market expectations and fits in with the strategies I've been even embracing in my own life, and we'll share those with you just because it's another voice out there that's sort of pointing in the same direction. We'll also dip our toes into that overheated water that is debt and defaults and things like that, with a little bit of an interesting note on where things are in the most recent data relating to that debt. So we'll cover that. We might even throw one more item in there just to keep things interesting. But for now, the best way to reach out to me, as usual, is the website. So head on over to therebelbroker.com, click on Contact in the menu bar. From there, you can send along any ideas, suggestions, or observations that you might have. If you'd like to help the show out, click the big red button at the top of the page titled Take the Survey to Support the Show. You'll be asked for your email address twice. Use the same email address both times. Answer a handful of demographic questions. And not only will you be helping the show grow and be successful and give me time to work more on stuff for you. If that's not motivation enough, I don't know what is. But if you needed more, you'll also be entered into a $50 Amazon gift card drawing, which we are doing once a month. And obviously, we're just a few days away from the next month, so you could get your name in there just in time to get added to the list before we do the drawing for June. We've done this enough times. I think we've given away $400, $500, something in that neighborhood. So jump on in. Congratulations to the folks who've already won their $50. Good luck to those who register or who have already registered and haven't won yet. And we'll see if we can't get you on the winners list. Okay. What to hit first? I guess we'll go with an opinion that we're finding from Seeking Alpha. This is a recent interview that they did with Kathy Fetka. I don't want to mispronounce her name, but she has it was on their Lifetime Income podcast, and she is the CEO and founder of the Real Wealth Network. And they had a chat kind of just about real estate in general. And I thought the conclusions were interesting. Like, they kind of validate what we've been talking about here. And to be honest, I'm not in bias validation mode. I'm not just looking for people who sort of agree with the things I say. I like to try to share with you folks who think everything's just fine and hunky-dory. But this was interesting because she represents a pretty big organization that's out there really trying to help people succeed, whatever their strategies are. So she really does not have a horse in the fight, right? It's not like you're talking to the folks from Realtor.com. It's not like you're talking to folks from the National Association of Realtors or some other organization that really only thrives when a certain kind of activity takes place in the real estate market or elsewhere. So I thought this was a good one to share with the group. And she brings up some things we've already touched on in far more detail. And she talks about how there's not a single real estate market. It's all about the micro markets. Totally agree. She also brought up what we've talked about, how in San Francisco, New York, we have seen a softening in terms of different elements of the market. We've seen a softening that we just discussed within the last week in San Francisco. There's been a softening in Miami. There's been very interesting rent softening in New York, which is a bit of a mind blower. So some of those big markets that we're always looking for indicators of what might be around the corner are indicating things are slowing down a little bit. What's interesting is she brings up the idea of cycles, and again, that's a thing we've talked about on this show. But she kind of closes with, quote, "If you wanted to get top dollar, now would be a fantastic time to sell." So I think that's an interesting flag to sort of plant in the ground. Now, I've been sharing the different statistics and things floating around out there for a while now. I've gone so far as to move my plan into the direction of selling my home because I also tend to believe that. She goes on to talk about the exodus out of overpriced markets. We've talked about how that's absolutely true, say, in the San Francisco market, where in a survey that was done late last year, over a third of the people who live in Silicon Valley want to leave Silicon Valley. And one of those main reasons is just how expensive it is to be in Silicon Valley. Now, interestingly enough, there was actually a survey done in March of this year where it's done by the Bay Area Council, and it was released, let's see, what was the day it was released? Somewhere just before March 30th of 2017, where that number is actually higher. 40% of the region's residents said they want to move away in the next few years, a marked increase from the 33% who said that in 2016, which is the data that I was pulling from the top of my head from last year. So the reason why we mention last year's versus this year's is it's always good to see a trend, right? Well, so it doesn't indicate that people are becoming more enamored with staying in this area. More people are becoming less enamored. We have a 7% increase just in the number of people who are looking at leaving this market. Now, what's particularly interesting is I had a call the other day from someone who's interested in selling their property if a certain thing happens. And what was that one single issue that this person is interested in selling their house and moving out if it happens? It is the Healthy California Act. Now, some of you may have heard of this. It's gotten some press over the last week or so, but California wants to push forward with a $400 billion universal health care bill, and that's a staggering amount of money. I mean, that basically doubles the California budget. If you look back at the California budget for 2015, the state funds were about $159 billion for the budget. So I'm assuming there's been growth in that budget over the last couple of years, but I'll bet that this represents a doubling of what they're committing to. Now, what's interesting about this is, let's see, the bill was passed in committee by a 5-2 vote. Now it has to go on the Senate floor. That'll happen this week. And it says here, the new bill, which places no healthcare utilization restrictions on Californians, would be paid for in part by $200 billion in funds reallocated from other government healthcare programs like Medicare and Medicaid. The state would be required to implement a $200 billion tax hike in order to cover the remaining cost of the bill. The Senate staff analysis found that a $200 billion tax increase would be equivalent to a 15% payroll tax increase on top of the 15.3% already taken out of Californians' paychecks, which would give us a 30.3% tax in California on paychecks. The report concludes that the statewide economic impact of such an overall tax increase on employment is beyond the scope of the analysis. And I've actually, this only came out within the last 4 or 5 days, and the call I got from someone was on Saturday afternoon. So it's interesting to me that something like this would just put someone over the edge. Or maybe it's not. The idea of paying a 30.3% payroll tax to California is offensive. It's a crazy policy. But what's interesting, the reason I bring it up is given the already, and you know, I get this is a very California specific thing. This is only something being looked at, being done in California. But people have been asking me a long time, what do I think would kill California? What is something that I would think that would happen where it could cause a huge ripple throughout the state that would negatively affect darn near everything? And I think something like this comes pretty close to the definition of that. I've never had a person call me and say, if this passes, I'm moving. So can you let me know what my home's worth? Or, you know, we talked about other options in terms of renting and that type of thing. But, you know, then I started thinking, if that's as toxic a move, where the law hasn't even passed yet, is still just being talked about, and someone is preparing for it, is that toxic enough to push over the edge a lot of talk I've heard from folks who say, my company is looking into the possibility of relocating to other states? Does it push over the edge the folks who suddenly take away 15% less per month? For every $100, $15 less per month. Is that something that pushes you over the edge? Is that something that makes you say it is simply not possible to live here? Because on top of everything else, we're expected to pay these ridiculous housing costs. We pay more for gasoline than most other states. So what does that mean for folks who hold real estate investments in California? Is this something you as an investor, let's say you were lucky enough to buy real estate when it was reasonably priced in the downturn, whether it's in San Jose or Sunnyvale, Santa Clara, Morgan Hill, San Francisco, wherever. What does that spell for you for the long-term success of your property? Does it negatively affect the rental market? And to some degree, I have to think it does. I know I would absolutely, and you have to think it's not just going to be that, right? A straight payroll tax thing. For all those self-employed folks, for folks who run their own businesses, there will be an equivalent, right? Rolled right into it. And it'll be part of what you pay on a normal yearly basis. It'll all be part of the stuff you pay, whether you're using an LLC for your corporation or you're using an S Corp or a C Corp. All of that stuff will have to get paid. So everyone's going to feel the pinch on this. And I find that to be kind of interesting in terms of considering how that might affect the real estate market, if not tons of other things, in California specifically. Now think about this for a second. If we're talking about the San Francisco Bay Area, the average income that you needed to buy a median home in 2015 was $142,448. And that was last year. So imagine what the cost would suddenly be for you in terms of managing that cost if suddenly you made 15% less in your hands. So now if we take that average, and I went on over to valuepenguin.com to look this data up, and it's ranked by annual health insurance costs for 2016. And it lists the most expensive down to the least expensive. If we took the most expensive insurance cost, health insurance costs of $5,112 annually being paid in Alaska, that wouldn't come anywhere near what would be taken out in that 15%. In that 15%, you'd be paying $21,367 if you're getting paid that medium amount you need to get paid in order to buy a home in California, which of course would go up because now you're making 15% less. If you were to spend $21,000 a year on insurance, hell, if you were to save, see, here's the thing, and I realize I'm going off into the weeds a little bit. Let's pretend someone actually cared about you having health insurance. They wouldn't say, give us the money and we'll give you health insurance and doctor coverage. They'd create a system independent of them where they don't ever get to touch your money. So imagine what would happen if you were making this median income, household income, whatever you want to call it, in California, and you were then banking $21,000 per year to put towards healthcare, which once you reach a certain age, you could use for whatever, right? You could even link it to some sort of bond investment type thing, something that's totally safe that maybe just gets a minimal return. So you're not just saving, you're actually getting interest on the money while it's being saved. It seems like creating a medical savings account would be more advantageous for the individual than this other system. But in any event, so that's not the question, right? That's not the question we're trying to answer. Those are some mental gymnastics I was going through while I was considering this problem. What effect does it have on real estate? And it becomes another, we've talked about the board with the index cards on it that we keep throwing new pieces of data on. Well, I think for California, we need to put this one on there. I think this could have a potentially huge effect on the markets in California. I think that simply because the ability of people to purchase would be dropped by 15%. I think that since their ability to pay rent would be dropped by 15%, it would push lower the active buyer pool in terms of price point they can afford to pay. It would push it down so much more that I think it would have a profound effect. It wouldn't just have an effect on folks who are building homes and trying to sell them. It would have a profound effect on your current renters. If you have renters in Sacramento, San Jose, Los Angeles, San Diego, wherever, if you have folks renting and suddenly their payroll taxes go up, suddenly their payroll taxes double from 15.3 to 30.3, you can bet that bad things are going to happen. Now, what does that precipitate? Now, the reason why I usually don't like to try to focus on, and a state isn't really a submarket, but a specific state. I like to try to make this relevant for everyone who's listening. And here's where it gets relevant for everyone who's listening. Let's pretend this happens. For those of you who don't live in California, understand this is absolutely feasible in terms of the kooky stuff that California state government has gotten up to in the past. So totally a reasonable concern, or maybe you're enthusiastic about this. Maybe you think, well, this is great. California will lead the way in healthcare. All I can go by is, historically what you tend to see when things like this happen. So we can ride that wave. But here's what starts to concern me. What about the folks who already have established a life? They've purchased a home. They've got a mortgage. They've got debt that they are managing. And suddenly they're taking home 15% less. 15% is not a small amount of money. What do they do? Well, it sounds to me like someone either has to decide what they're going to do about changing their lifestyle or selling their home and moving into something smaller. What does it feed? It feeds the kind of craziness that happened last time. It's a totally different kind of feeding of the monster, but it's absolutely a feeding. You suddenly boost an entire state, but not just any state. California is the most populous state in the union, with estimates being around 39 million people. Huge amounts of business go on here. Some of the most expensive real estate is in this state. Some of the largest numbers of funds committed to real estate are in this state. What do you think happens when a circumstance emerges that forces a lot of people to have to make that debt decision we've been talking about for the past few months? And we have to consult the data we talked about last week. What do people stop paying first when they're challenged? With the simple passage of one thing, it wouldn't take long for even the folks who celebrate the idea. Let that first paycheck come after that additional 15% has been taken out. Even for the folks who are completely ignorant of it, right? Don't think ahead. Don't actually think about what the reality on the ground will be. Just wait till those folks, which would probably be the majority of people, suddenly get that first paycheck that's 15% less. And at the end of the month, they realize, wait a minute. How many people do you know that are currently operating month to month with a 15% surplus from their income? Anybody? Now, I know there are plenty of folks that as a part of their belief system tithe to the church 10%. So maybe if everyone stopped tithing to the church, they've got that 10% margin. But what about the other 5%? I think that's a scary question to ponder, because here's why. And it's not just a California thing. I believe that if something like that happens, it doesn't just mean bad news for California. I think it means bad news for the country. I think we would be the giant kerosene-soaked log on that fire of bad stuff that sucks everybody in, right? We've got a gigantic economy. We are a big cog in the machine of the United States economy. And if we take a huge dump based on something like this, that whole rule of unintended consequences, where suddenly we've reduced the amount of money people have in their pockets to manage their lives, and people start doing what we heard they do last week in terms of the things they stop paying first, right? That scares me. So let that bounce around in your head for a minute. We're going to take a quick break. And when we come back, we'll talk about that a little bit more and maybe one other item before we call it quits for today. So don't go away. We'll be right back.
Are you ready to jump in and start your search for your first investment property? Maybe you've decided that it's time to own your own home, or maybe you're ready to sell your home and move on to something new. No matter what your goal is, the Rebel Broker can help. That's right, aside from hosting this show, I am also the owner, broker of Whitelaw & Sons Real Estate Services right here in Silicon Valley. With over 25 years experience serving Silicon Valley, Morgan Hill, San Martin, and Gilroy, I or one of my great agents can help you achieve your goals in real estate. So if you're ready to look into taking that next step towards achieving your real estate goals, point your browser at www.soldbyrobert.com. That's www.soldbyrobert.com and get in touch. Let me show you how I will earn your business and your respect. Again, that's www.soldbyrobert.com, or you can call me at 408-852-0525. California Bureau of Real Estate ID 00984-909.
Welcome back, everyone. Another day of wonderful news here on Real Estate Realities, where we are talking about the increased number of folks who already want to leave the Bay Area. We've talked about the potential impact of a full-on state healthcare system being implemented in California, which would be which, in order to be paid for, would need to be the equivalent of a 15% increase in payroll taxes. And let's, even for those of you out there listening who are California residents saying there is no way they will raise payroll taxes 15%. No way. Okay. But that's the equivalent of what's needed. So payroll taxes would probably be a part of it. I wouldn't be surprised if those who own real estate are a big chunk of it. They may try to disproportionately attach it to real estate values. You would hope Prop 13 would prevent that. But it comes out of somewhere. It's going to hit. It has to hit someplace. So the point is, if they adopt this, everybody's going to be 15% poorer than they were before. And honestly, the second something like that passes, and what'll happen is if it passes, it'll be one of those deals where it doesn't take effect tomorrow, right? It would be one of those deals where on January 1st, 2018, it goes into effect, or on July 1st, 2018, it goes into effect. I got to tell you, that would be a earth-changing thing, and I would absolutely consider that to be a almost guaranteed indicator that it's time for you to sell, because if it doesn't indicate at least a slowdown, it's going to indicate a huge dip, which may take a little time to happen, but I believe it would absolutely happen. It would affect everything. It would affect the buying habits of everyone as soon as those checks start getting cut by the amount that it's going to get cut by. They might try to give the perception of spreading it out so that the payroll tax part of it isn't where it all comes from. So that might delay the realization, but it'll happen in other things. Whether it's, it's not likely they'll throw it just into sales taxes because, to be super honest, they don't want to impact the lower end. They don't want that person buying at McDonald's or buying a Coke or whatever at the small amounts but they may say any purchases over a certain amount would be where the tax lives. It's going to be scary. It's going to be creepy if it happens. And I think you should all be mentally prepared for it, whether you live in California or not. Obviously, if you live in California, I think that's an indicator you should reevaluate your current strategies for investing in California, depending on what your situation is. If it does end up being something that's going to get hit by property taxes, which wouldn't surprise me one bit, even if you don't live here, that would impact you. You'd need to either do the math and figure out whether you're still positive cash flow. But remember, two things would happen. Your taxes would go up and the ability of your customers would go down in terms of what they can afford to pay for rent. You may have to not only suck it up and pay more in a tax, but in order to be competitive in the marketplace, you may need to lower your rent. Those two numbers don't go in the directions you want them to go. Increasing expenses and decreasing income is not the thing you want to see happen when you're holding real estate. It could completely redefine how everything happens in California in terms of the economics of the state. Now, another little tidbit that I wanted to throw out there is yet another bit of happy talk from our folks over at Zero Hedge. But again, this is them reporting on other data. I usually don't go with their drawing conclusion articles, aside from moments like yesterday where we talked about nothing but Zero Hedge articles and how depressing they were. But in this case, they're really just talking about debt numbers. And I think it's valuable to look at these because tie it in with what we talked about the other day in terms of what people stop paying first. Because these are the things that actually they tend to not stop paying first. All money center banks are reporting a similar trend. What the folks at Zero Hedge found is, according to the latest data from the S&P Experian Bank Card Default Index, as of March 2017, the default rate on U.S. credit cards had jumped to 3.31%, an increase of 13% from a year ago, and the highest default rate since June of 2013. It's been a 5 consecutive month surge in bank card default rates. This is something that should be a concern to you. I'll obviously include this article in the show notes for today's show for you to check it out yourself, along with all the other articles that I mentioned today, or all the other articles that contain the data that I mentioned today. And you know what? I promise, for at least for a while, this will be the last day we focus on just all of these things that make the overall puzzle of things that worry me about the debt and indebtedness and all these kinds of things. But I'll tell you, in a year or 2 years from now, I think a lot of us are going to wish that a lot more people in charge were having these discussions and worrying about these things. I think these are potentially going to come back and be some of the biggest, most annoying things in retrospect, in terms of things that we should have spotted coming that ended up really hosing us. Feel free to look into any of these. I'll also be including an article relating to the California Healthcare Act that they're talking about putting together here. And remember, I mentioned this before, the California State House is chock full of folks who would absolutely push this through. This is political nirvana for a lot of the folks who are in charge here in California, who seem to think they can do whatever they want to do and everything will be just fine, regardless of any evidence to the contrary. So stay tuned for that. I'll obviously keep my eye on it, because the other thing that'll happen, in addition to me trying to sell my home this year and considering buying investment properties here in California, I was thinking about Sacramento, but depending on where this goes, these are the other things that are now on my to-do list. Look into getting my real estate license in Texas, Arizona, Nevada, Oregon, Washington, Montana, the Dakotas, somewhere else, because that is how impactful I think something like this would be. And I was born and raised here. I was born in San Francisco, raised in the Bay Area. I've spent a few years off in other parts of the world and other parts of the country, but always came back, despite good reasons to not. But this would be it. For me, I would be like my seller who called me on Saturday, interested in finding out what they could sell their home for. I would be that person. I would be I'm out. I'm done. Thank you. Stick a fork in me. I'm heading out. Just because that would be crazy, ridiculous, and not something I want to saddle myself with. Okay. Well, folks, again, more nightmare fuel for you for this week. I apologize. I do hope all of you had a fantastic weekend and took some time out yesterday to at least take a minute to think about the folks who've given the ultimate sacrifice while in the service of the country during Memorial Day. And I hope it was an opportunity for you to enjoy the family, whatever your family makeup might be. I hope it was an opportunity for you to get together and enjoy each other's company. Thanks again for listening. And as always, I'll talk to you all next time.